silence. But when the house becomes empty, when everyone leaves and only shadows remain, there's a sound that shouldn't exist. A soft, melancholic meow, coming from a place where life hasn't dwelled for a very long time. Today we're going to discover why some homes keep melodies that should never be heard. Marina had always been one of those people who found comfort in solitude. After years working in noisy offices, her small house in the suburbs was her sacred refuge. But since she moved into that two-story residence, painted in faded blue, something had been disturbing her moments of silence. The house had belonged to Mrs. Eleanor, an elderly widow who lived there for over 40 years with her beloved Persian cat, Whiskers. The neighbors spoke of how the old woman would talk to her feline companion as if it were her only family, which in fact it was. When Eleanor passed away peacefully in her sleep, Whiskers was found 3 days later, curled up beside her, having refused to eat or drink. Marina learned this story from the real estate agent, who mentioned it casually while showing the property. "Sweet story, really. Shows how loyal pets can be," the agent had said with a practiced smile. But there was something in her eyes, a flicker of unease that Marina chose to ignore. The first week was perfect. Marina arranged her furniture, hung her paintings, and created the cozy atmosphere she'd always dreamed of. The hardwood floors creaked pleasantly under her feet, and sunlight streamed through the large windows, warming every corner. It was during the second week that she first heard it. It happened on a Tuesday evening. Marina was reading in her living room when she heard a faint sound, so soft she almost convinced herself it was the wind. But wind doesn't purr. Wind doesn't make that distinctive rhythmic vibration that only comes from a contented cat. She looked around, thinking perhaps a neighborhood cat had wandered inside, but found nothing. The sound came again the next evening, and the next. Always when she was alone. Always when the house was perfectly still. Marina began to notice a pattern. The sound seemed to come from upstairs, specifically from what had been Eleanor's bedroom, now Marina's home office. She started spending more time in that room, working late into the night, hoping to understand what she was hearing. The purring would begin softly, almost like a whisper, then gradually grow more distinct. Sometimes it seemed to move around the room, as if an invisible cat was walking in circles, marking its territory. Marina researched the house's history online. She found Eleanor's obituary, which mentioned her beloved companion Whiskers, who preceded her in death by 3 days. But it was a local forum post that made her blood run cold. A former neighbor had written, "Poor thing wouldn't stop," calling for Eleanor even after she was gone. We could hear it crying from outside the house for days. When they finally found them both, well, some bonds are stronger than death. As days passed, the sounds became more complex. The purring was joined by soft padding sounds like paws on hardwood. Marina would hear it walking from room to room upstairs while she sat in the kitchen, following what seemed to be a familiar routine. At exactly 6 p.m., she would hear the sounds move from the bedroom to the hallway, then down to what she assumed was the kitchen area upstairs, though her house only had one kitchen downstairs. Sleep became elusive. Marina would lie in her bed, listening to the gentle sounds above her head. Sometimes she heard what sounded like a food bowl being pushed across the floor, or the soft thud of a cat jumping onto furniture. The sounds were so realistic, so mundane, that they were somehow more unsettling than any dramatic haunting could have been. One night, Marina decided to investigate. Armed with her phone's flashlight, she climbed the stairs during the evening. Ritual. The sounds stopped the moment her foot touched the top step. The hallway stretched before her, empty and still, but she could swear she felt something brush against her ankles, that familiar sensation of a cat weaving between her legs. The encounters escalated after Marina's nocturnal investigation. It was as if her acknowledgement of the presence had given it permission to become more interactive. The next morning, she found her coffee mug moved from the kitchen counter to the windowsill, the exact spot where Eleanor used to place Whisker's water bowl. According to the neighbor, Marina had finally worked up the courage to ask. Mrs. Patterson, who lived next door, was a kind woman in her 70s who had been Eleanor's closest friend. When Marina mentioned the sounds, Mrs. Patterson's face grew pale. "Oh dear," she whispered, glancing toward Marina's house. "I was hoping... Well, I thought maybe it would stop once someone new lived there." She invited Marina in for tea and, over steaming cups of chamomile, Mrs. Patterson shared the full story. Eleanor and Whiskers had a routine, you see. Every day at 6, Whiskers would wait by the kitchen window for Eleanor to come home from her evening walk. She'd give him his dinner, and he'd purr so loudly you could hear it from my garden. When Eleanor's health started failing and she couldn't walk anymore, she'd still go upstairs at 6 and call for Whiskers even though he was right beside her. The poor thing was getting confused, you understand. But it was what Mrs. Patterson said next that chilled Marina to the bone. After they both passed, the sounds continued. For months we'd hear Whiskers calling for Eleanor every evening at 6. The house was empty, mind you, but clear as day you could hear him crying for her. The sound would start upstairs and move through the house, like he was searching for her. Marina learned that several potential buyers had backed out after spending time in the house. One family lasted only 3 days before leaving in the middle of the night. They said the cat wouldn't let them sleep, Mrs. Patterson explained. Said it would sit on their bed and purr all night long, but when they'd turn on the lights, nothing was there. That evening, Marina experienced this for herself. She was lying in bed when she felt the familiar weight of a cat settling near her feet. The purring began, soft and comforting at first, but gradually becoming more insistent, more desperate. She could feel the vibration through the mattress, could sense the presence of something that needed comfort, but could never find it. Marina tried to rationalize what was happening. She read about grief-induced hallucinations, about how the mind could create sensory experiences when dealing with loss or stress. But she wasn't grieving, or was she? She thought about her own loneliness, her move to this house as an escape from a life that felt increasingly empty. The realization hit her. One quiet Sunday afternoon, Whiskers wasn't just trapped in this house, he was searching for something he'd lost. The evening routine, the calling, the restless movement from room to room. It was all the behavior of a creature looking for its beloved companion. But Eleanor was gone, and Whiskers was caught in an eternal loop of hoping, waiting, and searching. This understanding changed everything. Instead of fear, Marina began to feel profound sadness for the invisible presence sharing her home. She started talking to it softly during the evening ritual. "She's not here anymore, little one," she would whisper to the empty hallway. "But you're not alone." The response was immediate and heartbreaking. The purring would stop, replaced by the softest, most mournful crying Marina had ever heard. It was the sound of pure longing, of love that transcended death but could never find fulfillment. Marina would sit in the hallway during these moments, tears streaming down her face, feeling the presence of something small and lost settling near her, seeking comfort from the only person who acknowledged its existence. But acknowledgement came with a price. The presence began to follow Marina throughout the house, no longer confined to the evening ritual. She would feel it winding around her legs while she cooked, would hear soft meows when she returned home from work, would feel the gentle weight of an invisible cat curling up beside her while she watched television. Marina realized she was becoming part of Whisker's world, but what terrified her most was the growing suspicion that he was trying to make her part of Eleanor's story too. The transformation was gradual, so subtle that Marina didn't recognize it at first. She began staying home more often, declining invitations from friends, finding excuses to avoid social gatherings. The house felt more comfortable than anywhere else, and Whiskers seemed most content when she was there to keep him company. She established new routines that eerily mirrored Eleanor's old life. Without conscious decision, Marina found herself taking evening walks at the same time Eleanor once had, returning home at exactly 6 to find Whiskers waiting. She could sense his presence by the kitchen window, feel his excitement at her return, hear his welcoming purr that seemed to say, "You're home, you're finally home." Marina started buying cat food, though she told herself it was ridiculous. She would place a small bowl of kibble by the window each evening, and by morning it would be scattered across the floor as if eaten by invisible paws. She bought a cat, bed, then toys, then a scratching post. Her friends thought she was planning to adopt a pet, but Marina knew better. She already had one. The conversations began shortly after. At first, Marina would simply talk to Whiskers about her day, sharing the mundane details of work and weather that Eleanor once had. But gradually, she realized she was answering back, responding to purrs and meows as if they were actual words. The one-sided conversations became dialogues that felt completely natural. "Did you have a good day, Whiskers?" she would ask. And somehow she knew the answer. She could sense his moods, understand his needs, feel his gratitude for her presence. It was the most profound companionship Marina had ever experienced, built on pure emotion and unconditional love. But the outside world began to feel increasingly foreign. Marina's supervisor called to check on her after she missed several days of work. Friends left concerned voicemails that she ignored. The mailman mentioned to Mrs. Patterson that Marina looked thin and pale, that she seemed to be talking to someone when she answered the door, though no one else was there. Mrs. Patterson visited on a grey October afternoon, worried about the changes she'd observed in her new neighbour. She found Marina in the living room, sitting in an old rocking chair that hadn't been there before, Eleanor's chair, which Mrs. Patterson recognised immediately. "Marina, dear, are you feeling all right?" she asked gently. "People are worried about you." Marina looked up with eyes that seemed to focus on something just beyond Mrs. Patterson's shoulder. "We're fine," she said softly. "Whiskers and I are taking care of each other. He was so lonely before, but now we have our routine." Mrs. Patterson felt a chill as she noticed the cat bowl by the window, the toys scattered across the floor, the scratching post in the corner. But what disturbed her most was the way Marina's voice had taken on Eleanor's cadence, her gentle, sing-song tone when talking to her beloved pet. "Marina, there is no cat," Mrs. Patterson said carefully. "Whiskers passed away years ago." Marina's expression grew confused, almost childlike. "But he's right here," she whispered, reaching down to pet something invisible. "He's purring. Can't you hear him purring?" And in the silence that followed, Mrs. Patterson could swear she heard it too. The soft, contented rumbling of a cat that had finally found its way home. But there was something else in that sound. Something that made her step backward toward the door. It wasn't just contentment she heard in that purr. It was possession, satisfaction, the sound of a creature that had successfully claimed what it needed. As Mrs. Patterson left the house, she glanced back to see Marina in the window, holding something invisible against her chest, rocking gently in Eleanor's chair. The house looked exactly as it had when Eleanor lived there, down to the lace curtains and the ceramic cat figurines on the windowsill. That night, neighbors reported hearing two voices from the house, Marina's soft murmuring, and another voice, elderly and gentle, both talking to something that purred and meowed in response. The conversations continued well into the night, creating a harmony of companionship that some found comforting and others found deeply unsettling. Marina never returned to work. She rarely left the house, except for brief evening walks that always ended at exactly 6 o'clock. Grocery deliveries appeared on her porch, though neighbors couldn't recall seeing her place orders. The house seemed frozen in time, maintaining the same routines that had comforted Eleanor and Whiskers decades before. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, people walking past the blue house would hear soft singing drifting from the windows, lullabies, and old songs that sounded like they were meant for a beloved pet. The voices would harmonize perfectly, two women separated by death, but united in their love for a cat that had refused to let go of the only home it had ever known. The mailman eventually stopped delivering to the house after finding Marina's mail piling up, unopened. When authorities finally entered the house months later, they found it impeccably maintained, filled with cat toys and furniture arranged exactly as it had been in Eleanor's time. But Marina was never found, though neighbors swear they still hear voices from the house every evening at 6, three companions who had finally found each other and refused to be separated again. The house stands empty now, officially, but the evening ritual continues. Every day at 6 o'clock, the blue house fills with the sounds of contentment, purring, gentle voices, and the soft footsteps of those who have found their eternal home, in the place where love transcends the boundaries between life and death.